Hello everyone, so I think we'll get going now. Thanks to everyone who filled in the polls on the homepage, and don't worry, this won't be your last chance to do so. We've got a few more of those questions that'll be peppered in throughout. So I am just going to switch over into our formal presentation screen here, and then we'll get things going. Great, so again, welcome everyone to the webinar today. For those of you who don't know me or who don't recognize my faceless voice coming at you, my name is Rosie Sims, and I am a water law and policy researcher here with the POLIS Water Sustainability Project based in Victoria. And I'm going to be moderating today's webinar, which is on the topic of pooling water knowledge, strengthening BC's water monitoring and reporting. And so this webinar is complementary to our ongoing Creating a Blue Dialogue series, and it's been really great to put it together in partnership with the BC Water Funders Collaborative. So just a quick bit of context on the topic we're going to be exploring today. Of course, given that water monitoring and reporting is absolutely critical for sound watershed decision making, about a year ago, POLIS hosted an initial webinar on this topic, and so this was a fairly high-level overview of monitoring and reporting issues in BC. We heard about some of the WWF freshwater health assessments and some specific tools in BC like the Pacific Salmon Explorer. And so this webinar back in 2016 was really intended to set the stage as a lead-in for further discussion. And on the slide there you can see a poll that we did in that webinar to see if there was interest in follow-up, and it was very clear that the majority of folks wanted a more detailed follow-up session, which is what today is intended to be. And so today we're really going to be digging into some perspectives and lessons learned from some specific BC-wide and regional monitoring initiatives, and we'll hear about some of the challenges and opportunities of pooling water data, and all of this with the goal of informing watershed decision-making. So just a few housekeeping points before we begin. The first point is that I do have everybody on a blanket mute since we're expecting about 75, 80 people to join today's session, so that'll just eliminate background noise. I can see that a lot of you have already been introducing yourselves in the chat box, but now is again a nice time to state your name, where you're calling in from, and maybe the weather where you're at. That helps it to feel like we're all in one room, so to speak. In terms of question and answers, we will also be using the chat box for those. And what we do is we save the questions and answers until the end of both presentations today. But again, please do feel free to write any questions you have as we go, and I'll just keep a running list and read them out and direct them to the speakers during the moderated Q&A time. And we also do have some polls throughout the webinar, and so I do encourage you to participate in those. It should be fun and offer some interesting insights into these key questions we're going to be exploring today as well. So today we have two fantastic speakers who have a lot of knowledge to share and some very diverse experiences and perspectives to bring to the topic of monitoring and reporting. Unfortunately, Lana Lowe, who is going to be our third speaker, is unable to be here today, but we have a fantastic duo here in Anna Warwick Sears and Carolyn Dubois. So to kick things off, we will have Anna Warwick Sears, who is the Executive Director of the Okanagan Basin Water Board, where she has held a leadership role since 2006. Anna also serves as a member of the International Osoyoos Lake Board of Control, appointed by the International Joint Commission. Anna received a PhD in population biology from the University of California, Davis, and is keenly inspired to bring together environmental, social, and economic goals to better protect the lives of BC residents. So thanks again, Anna, for being here today. And then next we'll hear from Carolyn Dubois, who is the Director of the Water Program at the Gordon Foundation, where she works with partners across sectors in Canada's north. And this work really focuses on improving freshwater stewardship through community engagement in decision-making and the use of best available evidence. Carolyn is a passionate advocate for open data and has led the development of the Mackenzie DataStream, which she's going to speak to today, online system that provides access to information about water quality. And Carolyn holds a BSc in biology from Mount Allison University and a master's in environmental management from the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. So with that, I'll turn things over to Anna, who's going to speak to an initiative of several members of the BC Water Funders Collaborative, which is an initiative to conduct a high-level province-wide scan of water monitoring initiatives in BC. So Anna, you can go ahead and push *6 to unmute yourself, and you should be able to advance your slides.
Excellent. Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to see such an enthusiastic audience of fellow water monitoring folks. So I'm here to just give an overview of this project that I've been working on with the Water Funders Collaborative. The Okanagan Basin Water Board is part of the collaborative, and we're all just sort of pitching in to see, to make this happen. So I'm going to go into it. I also sort of subtitled this project, What on Earth is Going On with Water Monitoring in BC? Because that's sort of where it started. And I wanted to just begin by giving some context about why I feel so passionately about it. I really feel like a huge amount of effort goes into collecting all the different types of water monitoring data, and all that data, it's like money in the bank. And to get full value out of this data, we really need to be using it for multiple purposes, because it takes some human effort to go out there and to, whether you're doing a scoop sample or whether you're reading some kind of monitoring equipment, all that, there's all this time and effort that goes into collecting all these different types of water data. And a lot of it is not, it's only being used for just one purpose, or it's being stored somewhere that other people can't access. I think that as climate change is heating up and you know, civilization progresses, everything is getting to be more expensive. Funding and budget allocations aren't going to be able to keep pace with expenditures unless we all find ways to get better value out of what we're doing. So I really think that we need to avoid duplicating efforts. We need to squeeze the value and meaning out of every drop of data that we have. So this probably goes without saying for this audience, everybody needs data. Anyone who's working in water needs data. Some people are working more with water quality information. Some people are working more with water supply information. Here in the Okanagan, there are water suppliers are up there who are trying to monitor and manage pollution sources. In the years that I've been working here in the Okanagan, people have been trying to, you know, work with the ranchers to try and get less cattle in the streams, trying to understand where they're coming in. All of that involves monitoring. There's monitoring that's involved in looking at dirt bike use, just natural erosion sources, all kinds of different pollution sources. But you can't really get a handle on what's coming in, what the problems are, unless you're going out there and doing the monitoring. The health of the streams in general requires the monitoring. The flow monitoring is something that we've been working on for many years, trying to figure out, you know, we used to have this huge hydrometric network in the Okanagan, and it really was shrunk down through budget cuts over the last decade or so, and we're trying to build it back up again because there's so many different things, from infrastructure planning to environmental flow needs, that really it's essential to have that kind of data. And then lately we've been trying to do more monitoring of groundwater and surface water together to better understand the connections between them because of all the work that's going into groundwater licensing. So that's just some of the things that I've personally experienced here in the Okanagan, and I know that throughout BC there are different reasons people are doing different kinds of monitoring, and people are collecting a lot of different kinds of data. I was really, you know, it was kind of in my face, this problem with the understanding who's collecting what kind of data. It really came up for me when I was approached by the International Joint Commission staff and asked, well, who's collecting water quality information in the Okanagan, and I knew that the water suppliers were doing it because they have to collect water data at their intakes, and they, as part of the, reporting to the health authorities. But I really didn't know who else was collecting water quality data, and so I went through this exercise of emailing everybody who might know and trying to collect all the reports and websites onto our own web page, which I show here, just part of it, and just try and keep those links alive and, try to get some kind of comprehensive list of water quality data in the Okanagan. And the truth is that it's a short list. There's really not that much water quality data being collected other than some of the ones that are difficult to access because it's water supplier data or because it's environmental data that's proprietary by industry or something like that. It's just very difficult to access. So it became obvious to me that we need some kind of organization with understanding who's collecting what kind of data. And then we started having these conversations through the BC Water Funders Network about the water funders wanted to come up with this shared vision for water monitoring and reporting in BC and to really have more strategic approach to increasing the capacity and effectiveness of what all the different watershed groups were doing in British Columbia. And to start with, we decided we needed to know better about who was collecting what kind of data where. And we couldn't really be strategic unless we had that kind of overview of the information, which is where the water monitoring and reporting scan came from. So basically what we've undertaken is a metadata analysis. We're not actually collecting water monitoring data. We're collecting data on who's collecting data, where they're collecting it, what kind of data they're collecting it, why they're collecting it, and building a map about where all these efforts are happening, trying to understand where the gaps are. There's a number of regional evaluations that have happened, some in the Northeast, some in the Kootenays, some on the coast, and so we're trying to use that information, take advantage of the people who've been doing that work, and identifying where the hubs are, who's hosting the databases that are providing that data out to people, what the quality of those hubs are, and who's taking advantage of them, and then what other kind of research projects are going on. So hopefully the outcome of this scan will be this basic metadata and as many different groups as we can find and connect with. Then we're going to produce a high-level report for the public and this map of where we understand that water monitoring is happening, and then provide some recommendations on what the gaps are and what further research needs to happen. Obviously, this is just an initial scan, but we're really hoping to get a much better picture about what's happening with water monitoring BC. Some of the things that the consultant, Carol Lutmer, has come up with, pretty interesting. I'm not going to go into what her results are, but just even in beginning her work on the study, she's identified that there are a lot of different types of monitoring. There's baseline monitoring, where you're collecting data over a specific time period to look at, the baseline health of a system, a river or watershed or a groundwater source, to sort of make that mark in time. Status and trends monitoring is the type that goes on over a long time period to assess changes over time. There's a fair amount of regulatory and compliance monitoring that's happening. There's a kind of monitoring that she calls effectiveness monitoring to determine whether policies and decisions are having the intended effect, whether, if somebody make some change in how their operations are, they might be doing some monitoring to see if they had the desired effect of reducing the pollution source, for example. And then there's quite a bit of applied research, which would be usually for a shorter time period, but often has a lot of value for giving insight into a particular type of issue. So what we did is Carol started working the phone and the email and contacting key resource people, gathering reports that had been written, engaging people who were active in the field, and trying to do as broad a sweep as possible to gather that metadata from as many people as possible. She's has categorized that there are about 8 different groups who are actively collecting data. So the first group is the senior government, federal and provincial government agencies. Then there's First Nations and First Nations organizations. There's community-based monitoring, which I know a lot of the folks on this call are very passionate about. Municipal and local governments are collecting data for different purposes. Water purveyors, as I said, are collecting data a lot, mostly for compliance with the health authorities, but it's a really valuable source of data that's, I think, is underused. Industry is collecting data. This is data that's often difficult to access. Academics usually are doing the research, the data collection, so for a shorter time period, but as I said, that kind of research can be extremely valuable to give an overview for a particular issue. And then there's other non-governmental organizations that are collecting data. So it's been interesting to dive into this. It's definitely validated my feeling that there's so much more data out there than I was aware of, or that many people are aware of. And I think, you know, the basic idea of getting together, sharing with the information that we have, and making broader use of whatever data is being collected, it's really going to pay off in the long run. So I think that is my presentation. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. That was a great overview. A very ambitious project of compiling the data on the data collectors, as you said. And so before we move over to Carolyn, we will have a third poll question here, which I'll just pull onto the screen. And that is, what are the biggest one of the biggest gaps in data collection in your watershed? So you can all just take a moment to throw your thoughts in that poll question. And again, feel free to leave your questions for the presenters in the chat box as we go. Just give a few more moments to let a couple more answers come in here, but I'm seeing some themes like water quality data, hydrometric data, some of the biological parameters, sediment data. So clearly some gaps in what is being collected right now. I'm sure this could be a very long laundry list as it goes along. And just for everyone on the call, what we'll be doing is compiling all the results of these polls in part of our summary right up from this webinar as well. So the data won't be lost once we have moved on from the webinar. Great. So with that, I think we will turn things over now to Carolyn. So Carolyn, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and then you should be able to move your slides forward as well. Perfect. Carolyn, can you push *6 to unmute yourself? Let's see if I can do that manually.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, great. Okay, well, before beginning, I just wanted to say thank you to Rosie and other organizers for having us on this webinar. I really am thrilled to be able to present on DataStream to this group. I'm going to provide some background on DataStream because I think it's really important to understand where we've come from and what got this project off the ground in order to understand really where we're going with it. And this is a great time to be talking about it because I think one of the takeaways from our presentation or my presentation will be that this is something that we still see in some ways as being nascent, but we are growing it. So this is an exciting time for this project for sure. And I'm also happy to be following Anna as well on this because I think that you'll see some similar themes come up in my presentation as what she's raised around the great work that they're doing in BC. So just as by way of a very brief introduction, if you're not familiar with the Gordon Foundation, we are a charitable foundation and have been around for 50 years. A lot of this work has been around water protection, but we also do work in other areas. But what I always say is that a common thread through all of our programming here tends to be to find ways for citizens and people to be involved in decision-making and policies where they affect them. And so I think you'll see from this presentation that that's very much like a cornerstone of what DataStream is about and why we're working on it. So DataStream came about to address some issues that we were seeing in the Mackenzie Basin. The Gordon Foundation many years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, made the decision to focus our water programming on the Mackenzie Basin. And at the time, as part of this process of building a program that was around water protection, we brought together an international forum of experts called the Rosenberg Forum that included legal experts and scientists and so on to look at the state of knowledge in the Mackenzie Basin and provide recommendations on what had to happen in order to protect it. And there were a number of recommendations from this report, and I encourage you to take a look at it because I think it's as relevant today as it was then. But 3 really big ones that we gleaned from this were that it was difficult to find data in the Mackenzie Basin to inform decision making. And I think that this echoes what Anna has raised, is that it's not always necessarily that there isn't any information, it's that it's really hard to get your hands on it. So that was one finding of the report. The next was that any management, and anybody who works in water will agree with this, but any management around water really should be done on watershed levels and basin levels. And so, management that is, crosses boundaries is very important. And thirdly, that in the Mackenzie Basin, and people need to be involved, communities need to be involved in stewarding freshwater resources. And so we took these recommendations and we're scoping program areas at the time. And one of the places where we saw really tremendous alignment with that was around some of the work that was underway in the Northwest Territories. If you're not familiar with it, I'd encourage anybody to take a look at what the government of the Northwest Territories and communities and other stakeholders have been able to do in the NWT around developing a Made in the North water stewardship strategy that communities were actively involved in, and what ultimately led to the development of a Northwest Territories-wide community-based monitoring program. So back when we were scoping our Mackenzie program, this was already well underway. Communities were being involved in actually going out, monitoring water in order to answer questions that they had about the health of their waterways. And this, we see, and I don't think I have to convince people on this line that that's very important and a powerful way of approaching water stewardship. So we were looking for ways to work collaboratively in order to, help support some of the work that was happening there. So I won't go into great detail on this slide here, but I do like to just point out that the water monitoring program, so that program in the Northwest Territories with the 21 communities involved there, but also some of the programs in the other jurisdictions in the Mackenzie Basin use a range of methods to collect water data. In the Northwest Territories, the program is actually collecting data on more than 70 parameters using a range of different methods, and that data does feed into DataStream. And so from this slide, if you just quickly scan it, you see that they're using in situ sensors, that stay in the water to measure changes over time. You've got passive membranes to measure hydrocarbons, which are a concern for some communities, and grab water samples. But clearly, there's a huge amount of work that is going into monitoring water. And this is, again, to echo, I think, what Anna said, is like there's just tons of work happening here. And this is money in the bank, so to speak. This is really important information when we're facing the challenges that we are around water stewardship. Like, we really need to be using this information to its full potential to inform decision making. And so, again, community monitoring is powerful, but I think that there is a need. This is true of community monitoring. I think it's also true of any other monitoring program. It's powerful. Data is certainly powerful. A powerful way of informing decision making, and it should be used. The problem is sometimes is that even though it may be collected and there's really great data out there in some cases, it's not always used to its full potential. So this is something that we were looking to address in the development of DataStream. So what we essentially wanted to do was build a home, an independent home, where the data could go and be made widely available in an openly accessible format, and also the easy-to-use web platform that people could actually access and pull data from. And by doing this would actually support community-based monitoring programs that were happening on the ground throughout the Mackenzie Basin. And I won't go into great detail on this, but I think it's important just to note this, is that there's, we've talked about watershed level or basin level management, and so there's obviously benefits just from like that point of view in bringing data together from different regions and from different data collectors, from communities to government. To bring all that data into one platform has obvious benefits that I don't think I need to talk about, but it is important to also talk about just like the practical benefits of using common platforms. So that's one of the things we've tried to do with DataStream, is it really is providing this data management infrastructure that, it wasn't cheap to build, and I don't think that, it would be practical for every monitoring program out there to build a system. And so the idea here is that we can actually provide some practical infrastructure that can support monitoring. And then I'll leave it there for this slide, but the main thing here is that once you have data that is openly accessible and people have access to the raw data, you have more people looking at it, and it can be used more to its full potential, which is, again, back to Anna's point. And once you understand what the data mean, you can actually use that information to inform decision making. So DataStream has been in development for a number of years now. We developed a pilot site, so a pilot version of DataStream from 2014 to 2015 in partnership with the government of the Northwest Territories. And Tessera Systems was our software developer that actually built the software. It wasn't done here. And then we officially launched DataStream in November of 2016 on Parliament Hill and in Fort Smith in the Northwest Territories. And so that's when DataStream, as you'll generally find it looks online now, that's when it did launch. And since, we began first with the 21 communities involved in the Northwest Territories monitoring program, but our vision is to expand DataStream to include other monitoring programs in the Mackenzie Basin, and we've already begun to do that. So actually, one of the presenters, Lana Lowe, who is going to present today, is from Fort Nelson First Nation, and she played a very big role in bringing Fort Nelson First Nation data online and onto DataStream. And we expect to continue to grow. That is, I think, an important message here. So I wish I could actually just sort of demo DataStream for people on the phone. So if you are interested in us doing that, I'd be happy to set up calls to do that. We get pretty excited about showing DataStream as it is now, but also how we're improving it. But some key aspects of DataStream to note are that it is an open access platform. We focus on water quality data. It provides this independent home for data that anybody can essentially plug into. We've focused on making it user-friendly, so you shouldn't need a PhD to find data that you're looking for. Like, if you have one, that's great, but you really should be able to very quickly zero in on whether there's data available in a place that you care about. We provide some basic visualization tools that we're constantly improving. And lastly, but this is, and I think this is very important, is we've put a lot of time and energy and effort into ensuring we have solid data management policies and practices. And I can go into this in more detail if people are interested, but to give you a sense of what this means is, answering questions around intellectual property. If you put your data into DataStream, that is not a transfer of intellectual property for that data. Like the data, the person who generates the data continues to hold, own that data, even though it's being made available online through an open access platform. And there are other aspects of the policy that may be of interest too that I can talk about. So I said that one of the big takeaways from my presentation today is that I'd like people to know that, this is DataStream. We've been working at it for a number of years, and I think we've set a really good foundation for it. But we are constantly growing it and are committed to DataStream succeeding over the long term and hopefully, bringing as much data online and making it available as possible. So I always say DataStream isn't a product, it's not a project, it's a program, and we really, we treat it that way here at the Foundation, and so do our partners, including the government of the Northwest Territories and others who are working with us on this. We're committed to continuous improvement of DataStream and evolving it. So to me, that means bringing new data sets online that answer questions people are concerned about. And it also means making the platform better and easier to use. So if you go on DataStream today and then you go back in a month's time, I can guarantee you that in a month you'll be seeing that we've already made improvements and that there will be new data sets coming online all the time. So we're constantly working at that. Importantly, we've kept some of the costs around DataStream quite low, so we are able to build it, modify it, host it, and scale it up. And so one of the areas that we'll be talking about more, in 2018 is some of the work that we're doing to actually build another DataStream hub in Atlantic Canada. So that's something that that you should be seeing on the horizon for this program. So I guess I'll leave it there for now. I'm looking forward to people's questions, and I'll just do one more plug to say that if you are interested in sort of having a longer conversation, we are happy to do that, and would be happy to meet with people over the phone or in person if you're interested.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was a great overview of a very leading example of open data platforms in Canada. And so just before we move into Q&A, we have, there's some links from Carolyn there on this slide as well, and we'll make sure that this gets captured in the resource package. So I believe we have just one more poll question before we move into the Q&A. So again, do feel free to type your questions for the speakers in the chat box at this point. And we also have two poll questions on the slide here. The first is, do you currently use a data hub or online platform for a variety of uses? And how would you like to see data hubs improved? So I'll just leave those questions on the slide for a few minutes here, and we'll start collecting some questions as well. So maybe while we let some of the polling fill in a little further, let's jump into some of the Q&A. And so to start things off, there's a question for Carolyn from Leanne Sexsmith, who asks, who houses, maintains, supports, and funds the common platform over the long term? So Carolyn, again, just push *6 so that we can all hear your reply.
Hi, yes, I've just done that. So sorry, can you just repeat that? I don't see it. I don't think I see the question.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a question from Leanne Sexsmith, who's asking who houses, maintains, supports, and funds the common platform over the long term.
Okay, great. So the DataStream is a project or a program at the Gordon Foundation. In terms of funding, the Gordon Foundation has dedicated funds to continue to support DataStream, and we'll be doing that over the long term. But we also do fundraise and have received contributions from others as well to build the platform. Housing is, it's actually housed on the Amazon cloud. So in terms of like physical location, it isn't actually in our offices in Toronto, but it is on the cloud, which has kept costs down. And in terms of maintenance, again, I mean, I'd say that, you know, we both fund DataStream, but we also, you know, we've got a staff here that are working on keeping it running and responding to some of the community you know, needs around improvements. But we also do that in partnership with our partners in the government of the Northwest Territories, and we'll be doing that as well as we move into Atlantic Canada. So we, you know, it is a real partnership model for providing some of the supports that are needed around DataStream, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. I see that Anna has a question for you as well. Anna, do you want to just unmute yourself and read out your question to Carolyn?
Hi, thanks. That was a really great presentation and super nice slides and very inspiring. But I'm just curious because one of the questions that comes up is how do you know the quality of the data that you're accessing if you didn't collect it yourself? And I just wondered if in the data stream you had metadata or some kind of ranking about the quality of the data that was being provided. And so how are people interpreting any individual data set? So I'll mute myself again and look forward to your answer.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that we do often get. And so, well, the answer is that first of all, one thing that helps to know about DataStream to understand just like mechanically how it works, like from the time data is collected to it being uploaded, is it's not, right now, it's not a like free-for-all, not everybody can upload data. So we really are, when I say like we're working in partnership with groups, like we really are. So, you know, putting data on DataStream normally involves like, you know, some conversations around like, you know, how we can best support bringing data online, what QA/QC needs to be done to data. In the case of we're very fortunate in that our partner up in the Northwest Territories, they've got very, very, you know, scientifically robust QA/QC procedures in place that they're using for their community-based monitoring data. So when it is uploaded into DataStream, it is already of a very high quality. We also do have, like, from a software perspective, we do some quality control checks as well to make sure that it hasn't been uploaded incorrectly. So you actually can't upload data to DataStream incorrectly. It will stop you. But I think it's important, like you just brought up a very interesting, well, it's something that we've been thinking about quite a lot around, you know, how do you rank data? You know, is there a way of making it very clear to people whether the data has been QA/QC'd, for example. And I think that's a really big issue because we always say the Gordon Foundation and DataStream are not in a position to be like the data police, so to speak. So even though, you know, we of course want high quality data coming into DataStream, but we also understand that in some cases, the only data available may not be of the very highest quality, like it could be used in absolutely every scientific application you can imagine, but that doesn't mean that it's not valuable. It just means that it can be used for some things but not others. So what we're looking at doing, and we haven't practiced that yet, but we will, is to come up with essentially exactly what you're saying, which is a system for flagging or indicating to users what level of QA/QC has been performed on data sets so that when they go to apply them, they're using them for the data for appropriate applications.
Great. Thanks for that response, Carolyn. You're in demand here. I see two questions here from Natasha Overdoon, my colleague based in Golden. So her first question is, what are the biggest challenges for self-organizing that others might expect if they wanted to establish something like this in their region?
So I guess my first question to Natasha is just, is it for, I'm assuming this is applied to DataStream, so what would it take to build like a hub in your region? Not like the monitoring program itself, but the hub, which is what we've done. And so I would say it's a really good question because like I really do believe that there are big challenges to getting started and building something like this from scratch. when we were scoping this program, that was one of the big findings, was that there still are like a lot of attempts to build systems that are designed specifically for one group, and maybe and often only one group, and that often isn't sustainable. Like, it does take time and money to build a system like this, and it's not just software is expensive, so that's one issue. But I think it's also that it's like time and effort to think through things like the data policies and how you're going to structure things. So I think that, to me, like, that would be the big challenge, is having dedicated resources to actually spend the time to get it off the ground properly and in a way that people like are comfortable with and trust and feel a vested interest in, so that it's not just this kind of anonymous site that you're throwing data up onto. So yeah, that would be it. I hope that answers Natasha's question.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. So I guess just one follow-up for Natasha here is just what kinds of decisions at the local and basin scale that the DataStream has helped inform so far?
Well, like I said, it's still fairly early days, but we did, so my answer is probably not going to be fully satisfactory, but, and I think that if you spoke, for example, with some of the folks up in the Northwest Territories, they would have better answers even, because they're closer to some of the monitoring and the decision making. But we did run an assessment of DataStream and how the data was being used. That was one of the questions, and we did hear from communities who had said that they had consultants they were working with pull data from DataStream to be used in assessing baseline conditions, because they were considering developments in their region. We also heard from the other side, from consultants saying that they had been asked or directed to go to DataStream to pull data for similar reasons. And in terms of the basin-wide level, I would say that it's too early to say. But we'd love to see the data used in things like, some of the conversations that happen around transboundary water management and so on.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. So there's a question here from Jen that I'll ping to Anna first, but it'd be great to hear your perspectives as well after Carolyn. So the question is, as the province of British Columbia develops Water Sustainability Act regulations, what are some of the key considerations around water monitoring and reporting that you'd like to see articulated in those regulations?
Wow, that's a big question. I was just reading it on the display and trying to think about an answer to it. It's challenging because some of the things that the Water Sustainability Act regulations are working on are things that they don't just require water monitoring, they require analysis of the water monitoring. So for example, we have a big project going on trying to look at environmental flow needs in the streams, and that's all based on a pretty heavy-duty 2-year monitoring effort that we're doing with the Okanagan Nation Alliance and the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations. So it's almost like those EFNs, those environmental flow needs, have to be based on good water monitoring. And so maybe that is something that should be going into the regulations, is that in sensitive streams, they need to have some kind of ongoing water monitoring effort happening on them. The other thing is that there's a lot of groundwater licensing that's happening and not very many groundwater monitoring wells. And so it's, I think, going to be very difficult for the provincial government to fully actualize their goals with the groundwater licensing without having more monitoring. So I think my basic feeling with the province, potentially working with the feds, potentially working with local communities, is that they need to put a lot more resources into monitoring in general, especially for those really high quality senior government monitoring sources. I mean, we love the water survey data, but there's so little of it. So I guess I'm just greedy for more good hydrometric data. I want more of it, and I think that it's going to be essential for really making the Water Sustainability Act come to life. And I guess I'll just leave it at that and see what Carolyn has to say.
Thanks, Anna. Carolyn, did you want to jump in at all on Jen's question? Carolyn, did you want to pitch in at all to Jen's question about the Water Sustainability Act?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just around developing regulations, I mean, I think that what Anna just said around like being greedy for more data, I can definitely relate to that. But probably one of the things that I'd say is like just to ensure that there are like that there's some strategy that around how the data is actually being collected, because it seems that there's quite a lot of siloing happening around data collection, and not always thinking about sort of like the whole sort of system and how all of these efforts feed into each other, or whether there's duplication of effort and so on, and whether the data are actually fit for the applications that you actually are, you're trying to use them for. So that would be the only thing that I would add there, is just ensuring that you've got good, high quality data where you need it.
Perfect, thanks so much. There's a question here from Kim Hyatt, who's asking, what is Water Survey of Canada's view of community-based water quality data hubs? I'm not sure if either of you wants to take a first crack at that.
This is Anna. I'll jump in. I don't know about how they feel specifically about community-based monitoring, but I know that here in the Okanagan we've had an ongoing effort to comb the valley for hydrometric monitoring that's being done by water suppliers and industry, and there's quite a bit more monitoring that's out there than is officially under the Water Survey umbrella. The Water Survey has not been enthusiastic about blending their data in, or at least we can't upload any of this locally collected data onto the Water Survey site. What we have been attempting to do is to develop a new database, and maybe in the future some kind of a hub where we are downloading the Water Survey data so that people can collect them at the same time or side by side, or pick them from a map, whether it's a locally collected water monitoring source or a water survey source. So I think my feeling, not being able to speak for Environment Canada and Water Survey, is that they're probably not that keen about blending them into their official database, just because they have such high standards, and they are concerned about people who aren't them doing the QA/QCing. So that's just my personal experience.
Thanks, Anna. Carolyn, did you want to add anything to that?
I don't think I have much to add to that in terms of Water Survey's view of that. I haven't spoken with them. So no, I think that we'll leave it there.
Perfect. So Carolyn, I have a follow-up question then from Leanne Sexsmith, who's just asking, other than the Government of Northwest Territories as a key partner, are there any other key partners? And a bit more about the governance structure for DataStream.
Sure. So that's absolutely, that's right. The Government of the Northwest Territories has been a key partner for this project, as a founding partner for DataStream. There are other key partners. Some of the First Nations that we're working with in the Northwest Territory, or sorry, in British Columbia and Alberta are also key partners to this. But you're asking a very, very tough question there, Leanne, around our governance model, because it's actually, I said we were nascent, and we're figuring that out sort of as I'm giving this. This is the one of the big questions that we have moving forward is how we're going to structure our relationships with some of the partners we're working with. And so this is especially, you can imagine, as we're moving into the East Coast, where we're working with the Community-Based Environmental Monitoring Network. These are some of the questions that we're working through. So I don't have a good answer to that or a definitive answer, but what I will say is that what we're trying to achieve through this and through our governance is a system where people feel that they can have some ownership for DataStream, because we'd like to see them incorporated into how they do their monitoring. And I think people are most likely to do that if they have some say in how the platform continues to evolve.
Great, thanks so much. There's kind of a related governance question here from Kate Cave, who asks, in some of the conversations with communities about DataStream, the question comes up, if you join DataStream and contribute your data and then want to pull it out again sometime in the future, can you do that? And who owns the data after it's been submitted?
So the second part of that question, who owns the data, is a really, really good question, in that it is still the community. So per our data policy, and when you actually upload data, you get a pop-up. I think most people have seen this on any website, where that is all laid out. Like, you are not transferring any ownership whatsoever for your data by putting it in DataStream. So that's very important. In terms of pulling data out of DataStream, I would wonder what the reasons would be for doing that. It's not that there would be no issue with pulling data off of DataStream, but I would just say that once data is made available on DataStream, a core part of our model is that it is open access. And so once you put it up, it's out there. People are likely have been downloading it and using it. And so that would just be an important thing to note. And I'll just say on that it's, and I didn't say this in my presentation, but I should emphasize it, is that it's really important for communities, if they're thinking of putting some data on DataStream, that they realize that DataStream isn't the home necessarily for all the data you've ever collected ever. There may be some very good reasons for not wanting to make some data open access. DataStream is a home for the data that you want the world to see that you've been collecting, that you see value in having out there in the world. And so if I were to speak directly to those communities, we would want to have that conversation just so that was sort of, spelled out.
Thanks very much. So there's a question here from Jackie, who asks, in either of your projects, have you found any data standards or projects to create data standards that could be used to guide disparate monitoring efforts? So maybe I'll pitch that to you first, Anna.
I think the data standards it's definitely an active conversation. I'll just say that. There are definitely some data standards that are out there. I don't know if everyone is using the same data standards, but this is the type of thing that we're hoping to come out of our landscape scan, as it's called, to really understand like who's using what kind of standards and what they're trying for. So I would say it's still a work in progress that relates also to Kim Hyatt's comment in the chat box about fit-for-purpose standards. Kim says, I think the issue relates to developing fit-for-purpose standards against which data may be classified and then used to avoid unwarranted applications. All or at least most of the data are useful for some purposes, but very few data sets are useful for a wide-ranging purposes. So I think, yeah, we need to, it would be great in an ideal world that each data set was ranked and flagged in some way as for fitness for purpose, and was very transparent about what data standards it was being collected under.
Thanks, Anna. Carolyn, did you want to add anything to that question?
Honestly, I think Kim said it very, very well in her comment. I think that would have been what I probably would not have said it as well. Just that you've got to be, I think standards are important, but I think they can also be a problem. If you create standards that are too difficult for anybody to use, that's a recipe for having a system and data out there, like or having a system where people aren't sharing data because they can't meet those standards, and so you're not even aware of what you're missing when you put that bar so high that nobody can reach it. So, but again, I think Kim said that very, very well.
Great, thanks both. This isn't a question so much, but I just draw your attention to the discussion in the chat box about BC Ministry of Environment and Flynn Rose Groundwater Science and Monitoring Program. And again, we'll make sure that the links that have been dropped in the chat box are included in our report out from this webinar. So I just have one final wrap-up question for the presenters, and then perhaps we can move on, although I'm seeing one final one in the chat box that we'll take first, which is from Irvine LeBlanc, who asks, First Nations are often seen as black holes of information, and what efforts have been made to include First Nations data, particularly in areas of resource development? So perhaps, Anna, would you like to take a first crack at that one?
First Nations have definitely been included in the landscape scan. Our consultant has been, Carol Lutmer, has been reaching out to different First Nations organizations. The First Nations Fisheries Council is on the steering committee and is helping facilitate that. But speaking of groups that might have reasons where they might want to keep some data proprietary, I know that this applies to a number of First Nations communities, especially around data that relates to traditional knowledge. So I think I wouldn't call them as black holes of information. I would say that you know, there's a lot of reasons to share data, and there's also a lot of reasons to not share data. And I'm sure that things are farther along in the Mackenzie. So I'm going to punt that question along to Carolyn.
Yeah, I think that I'd probably echo some of what Anna said, is like, just first off, that there are data that I think should and are being shared, and data that aren't. In the Mackenzie Basin, it's very much core to how we've been working on Mackenzie DataStream has been to include First Nations in DataStream, and so in getting some of their data out there, and many of these First Nations we're working with are in natural resource development areas. I should say that we're still growing and we're still learning here. Our partners up in the Northwest Territories will know still more, but we've been it's been pretty impressive to see some of the monitoring and some of the long-term monitoring that's happening in First Nations, and really encouraging that there's an openness and a willingness to put it out there and get it up and online so that others can actually use it too. So I'd say that that's like a big part of what we are trying to do through DataStream is get some of that data out there.
Great, thanks, Irvine, and for both of your responses there. So we are now at 1 o'clock, and I know we booked till 1:30, but since we are one speaker fewer than we anticipated, I think we'll move towards wrap-up. So I just have a final question for the two speakers, kind of thinking bigger picture, long-term, if you have any final thoughts about what your vision of water monitoring and reporting in BC could ideally look like 5 years down the road from now. And maybe we'll have Carolyn give her thoughts first, and then Anna.
Well, I would say, I'll start off with some of the work that's already underway and that Anna's involved in, and the BC Water Funders Collaborative and POLIS. This is, around taking stock of what you have, I think is like a huge, huge step towards what I hope is the situation in 5 years where what data is being collected, and who's got it, and which programs are long-term and which are, more focused on a shorter-term question, and that you can actually begin to access that information to make decisions. Like, that's where I would hope, and this is, from my very sort of data-focused angle there, I'm hopeful, just based on what we're seeing around some of the energy around these issues, that great strides will be made in that direction over the next 5 years.
Wonderful. Anna, your 5-year vision?
I love what Carolyn had to say. I feel like we have a lot of organizing to do, but I think that we're making forward progress. One of the early results that our consultant, Carol Lutmer, has come up with is that there seem to be quite a few data hubs in BC, and maybe not as much actual monitoring as we need. So I would like to see some evolution or some kind of way of, in one of these poll comments I said, we almost need a hub of hubs. We need to be able to get organized in terms of the data hubs. What is the sort of, you know, is there going to be something like they have in the Mackenzie with the DataStream, or are we going to have some other way of helping people access the data through these hubs, or are some of the hubs going to be consolidated? All of those are good things to discuss once we have a better idea about exactly where we are. And I would also really hope to see a lot more support on the, you know, in the grassroots and the smaller organizations that are doing monitoring. And I would love to see a reinvigoration of some of the senior government water monitoring networks that really atrophied over the last 10 years. So in a perfect world, I would like to see high quality data being collected across British Columbia and having it be much more easy to access. So thanks everybody. Thank you, Rosie, and to POLIS for putting this on. I think that this was one of the liveliest webinars that I've ever participated in, and I've really gotten a lot out of both Carolyn's presentation and all the questions and comments of these really high caliber attendees that we've had. So thank you all.
Yeah, I'd echo that as well. This has been a really wonderful discussion, and I just want to extend a huge thanks to both Anna and Carolyn for the fantastic presentations and insights they've shared today. So I think we'll wrap up there. I know that Rick Simpson had a specific question for Carolyn, but perhaps I can connect you two by email after the webinar. So again, thank you all so much for joining this afternoon, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weeks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.